Howdy, folks. Video here today about conflict in story writing. So we're kind of focusing in on this second biggest chunk of stories, right? We've introduced our characters, and now things have got to start happening. Things have got to start getting sticky and complicated, and they're usually caused by some sort of conflict, right? And you don't have to think about this in terms of like a blockbuster movie. There's a supervillain, invading Billings or wherever. It's a lot more subtle than that potentially. So again, our learning goal here, what we're working on is we're working on writing narratives. And specifically, we're thinking about developing real experiences and events, talking about our conflicts, and we're trying to structure those event sequences in a way that makes sense. So to help us out with conflict, really, it is what drives a story. Without a problem, without an issue that a narrator or a character has to work through, you don't have an interesting story. No one cares. It's just like, hey, I went to the store and got some milk. No problem, right? No story. And so you have to think about what that issue, that conflict, that complication is going to be. So there's internal conflicts and external conflicts, like versus man to be your narrator versus another person, or versus nature, right? Maybe you're talking about this hiking trip that you went on and you got lost, right? That's you versus nature. You got to figure that out. There's also internal conflicts, which is sort of the narrator versus themselves, maybe doubts that they have, maybe things that they don't realize. Ignorance can be a conflict, right? If I don't know something and that's creating issues for me around my own life, that's an internal conflict that maybe your story could be about. It could be about this time that I realized something that I hadn't realized before. And then I put this one kind of at the end, versus society, because this one kind of bridges external conflicts and internal conflicts, because a lot of times we take societal pressure and internalize it. So you could kind of go either way, whether this is external or internal. But good thing to note is that good stories, most good stories, have both external conflicts and internal conflicts, right? Think about Catcher in the Rye. There is definitely some issues going on between him and other people, and him and society, right? But there's also a lot of deep-seated issues in poor Holden Caulfield that he's facing himself or trying to avoid, right? Which is creating even more conflict and issues with his life around him. So once you kind of have thought about, okay, this is what conflict is, we've got to build some conflict. So one of the easiest ways to do that is to know who your characters are and what do they value at that point in their lives. So if you're writing a personal narrative about last year or 2 years ago or 5 years ago, think about yourself and what did you care about going on that fishing trip or applying for the scholarships or I don't know, whatever your story ends up being about. So what do they value? And do any of their values kind of come into conflict with something? So one of my personal examples would be me thinking about getting my teaching degree. And I had some external conflict with one of my teachers where I would consistently call him out in class. And this is like a master's level graduate class. I was being horribly unprofessional. Because I was focusing in on this idea of productivity. I thought that his class was a waste of time sometimes. And so I would get grumpy about it and I would kind of act out in class about it. I know I was mostly respectful, but I wasn't shy about expressing my difficulty with his class. So my value of productivity did not match his value of teaching about maybe these different ideas that I thought I don't care about it. What compassion isn't a good one. But that was sort of a conflict that I had. I thought my time was being wasted and it created issues, created this conflict between me and one of my professors who ended up being a great professor and wrote a letter of recommendation that helped me get, a job in the Billings Public Schools. So we mended things out. And let's see here. We're going to skip this slide and we're going to head to this one. This is what I wanted. So I just wanted to give you a couple of examples on this slide for you to just brainstorm about. Because again, this can be really subtle conflict. So maybe you can read these. I don't need to read these aloud to you. But generally, try to choose something that's meaningful for you. try to choose something that shows that you learned or the narrator learned something from this experience, but also choose something that shows that a reader can learn from this story too. What's the bigger picture that this maybe conflict is creating? Again, I don't want to get too much into Catcher in the Rye because I don't know where you are in the story, but the story is not just about Holden Caulfield. The story is definitely about the issues that he is experiencing internally, and by understanding his issues and his inability to confront those issues, we are learning something about the way we should manage um, things like depression and PTSD and probably a pretty dysfunctional family life if you start reading in between the lines for poor Holden Caulfield. But if you're looking closely, Holden learns about himself. He definitely shows other people what they can learn from his experiences. All right. If you want to take a look at the rest of this slideshow, there's just a bunch of activities and examples that you can kind of work through to look to see how other authors and writers and film create conflict in their own stories. So good luck, folks. Cheers.